They said the guest room was taken. You can sleep in the garage, Grandma, Shelley added, without looking up from her phone. I didn't argue. I just nodded. Later, as I sat on a fold-out cot next to paint cans and a lawnmower, I realized I'd already made my decision. The cold settled into my bones by midnight. No insulation, no heater, just a scratchy blanket and an old quilt I'd crocheted myself back in 1982, the one with the orange tulips. My hands, once deft and fast, now slow and aching, tried to tuck the quilt tighter around my shoulders. My breath came out in puffs of mist. Somewhere inside the house, laughter burst from the living room. I could hear the clinking of glasses, the bright edge in Greg's voice when he drank too much, and Shelley's louder than necessary laugh. There must have been guests. Someone important enough to take the guest room. I didn't ask who. I hadn't asked much for years. The concrete under the cot was unforgiving. I turned to one side, my hip protested, turned to the other, my back joined in. The garage smelled like motor oil and dust. I closed my eyes and thought of James. He'd been gone 22 years, and somehow I still reached for him in moments like these. You wouldn't have let this happen, I whispered. My voice echoed against the metal shelving. Nobody heard. At 4:15, I opened the door and stepped out into the freezing morning. Stars still hung in the sky, sharp and indifferent. My breath fogged the air as I carried my small bag down the driveway. I didn't look back at the house. I already knew every window, every brick, every flicker of porch light. I'd paid for half of it after all. The bus station was a 20-minute walk. I took it slow. My knees didn't like the cold, but I kept moving. At the corner, a neighbor's dog barked once and fell silent. A porch light blinked on. No one came out. At the station, I bought a ticket to nowhere in particular. Just the first bus out. The woman behind the counter raised an eyebrow when she saw me with no coat, no scarf, just a thick sweater and a cardigan. You okay, ma'am? She asked. I'm leaving before someone locks me in the garage again, I said. She didn't laugh, just nodded and handed me my ticket. On the bus, I sat by the window and watched the town pass by. The bakery where I used to buy cinnamon rolls for Greg before school. The library where I'd taught reading to second graders for 2 decades. The small park where I pushed a stroller, then watched from a bench as Greg played soccer. Places I used to belong. By the time the sun came up, I was 50 miles away. A diner near the highway welcomed me with weak coffee and warm pancakes. I sat in a booth, rubbing warmth back into my hands, and thought, not for the first time, that something in me had gone quiet these last few years. Quiet and tired, but not dead. I pulled a napkin from the dispenser and started writing. Names. Numbers. Things that still had my name on them. The house, the savings account, the small trust fund James and I had started for emergencies. I'd given Greg too much access. That was about to change. My phone buzzed in my purse. I didn't take it out. I didn't want to see the messages yet. Let them wonder. Let them return to an empty house and figure out what it meant. It wasn't revenge. It was release. The first time I told myself it was temporary, just until I got back on my feet. That's what I told Greg when I moved in, 3 winters ago, after a slip on the back steps left me with a broken wrist and a cast up to my elbow. Only for a few weeks, I said, until I can cook again, drive again. Shelley had nodded like she was doing me a favor. Of course, she'd said, all teeth and no warmth. Greg hadn't looked up from his laptop, but weeks became months, then months became silence. No discussion of me leaving, but no suggestion I stay. I became part of the furniture. Quiet, out of the way, low maintenance. I learned when not to enter the kitchen, when not to touch the thermostat, when to disappear into my room. They called it the guest room, but it had no lock, and the mattress sagged in the middle. The dresser smelled of cedar and old mothballs. I brought only the essentials: a week's worth of clothes, a framed photo of James, my knitting basket. It was supposed to be temporary. I didn't want to get comfortable. Shelley liked things just so. Shoes by the door, no perfumes, no TV during dinner. "It's not personal," she'd say when she moved my things. "I just need order." One morning, I found my teacups boxed and stacked by the basement stairs. "Too much clutter," she explained. I didn't argue. Greg was different when he was younger. He used to curl into me after school, his head tucked under my chin. "You smell like cookies," he once said. I don't know when he started looking at me like a slow-moving inconvenience. Probably when I sold the house, the one James built with his own hands, and gave most of the money to help with their mortgage. "It's only right," Greg had said, pleased. "You'll be living here now. It's still your home, too." That was the last time he made me feel like I belonged. I didn't complain. That's the part that keeps circling in my mind. I didn't complain when they switched my room twice to accommodate guests. I didn't complain when they forgot my birthday, or when they asked me to keep quiet during Shelley's Zoom calls, or when they left me off the vacation trip to Arizona, because flights are tricky at your age. I adapted. I found ways to shrink myself into their lives without taking up too much space. I learned to cook early, clean when no one was home, and retreat quietly when they had company. I smiled when they remembered to include me in group photos and didn't cry when they cropped me out for the frames. But time has a way of sharpening small indignities into something hard and bright. It was Shelley's voice that woke me, sharp and exasperated. "Greg, I told you, the guest room's taken. Your mom can sleep in the garage." There was no whispering, no apology. They spoke like I was deaf or too old to care. I lay still in the bed that was mine and not mine. It was late. The window glowed faintly from the porch light. Somewhere in the hallway, someone laughed. The garage. I got up, folded the quilt, and packed a small bag. Socks, my toothbrush, my arthritis pills. I didn't rush. I moved like someone wrapping up a job. When I opened the door and walked past their closed bedroom, I didn't hesitate. I left the quilt on the cot in the garage. That was 3 days ago. Now, seated in a quiet public library in a nearby town, I reread the list I'd written on the diner napkin. It had grown. Beneath each item, I had written questions. Joint account. How many auto payments are going to their utilities? Mortgage. Is my name still on the refinancing? Emergency fund. How much has been withdrawn this year? It was all so clear now. Not cruel, not deliberate, not at first. Just convenient. Just practical. Just enough to slowly erase me from everything except the money. I was useful when I helped. Invisible when I asked. I folded the paper, placed it in my purse, and walked out of the library with a sense I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. I wasn't going back. Not like before. It started with the thermostat. The first winter I got up at 6 to make tea and warm my joints by the stove. I turned the heat up to 72. By 8, it was back down to 65. "Energy costs are insane," Shelley had said, smiling with all her teeth. "We try to keep it low. Hope that's okay." So I wore 2 sweaters and fingerless gloves in the kitchen, drank lukewarm tea, and told myself it was fine. I'd lived through worse. Then it was the TV. "Could you keep it low?" Greg asked one afternoon while I watched a documentary in the den. I've got a call in 10. His home office had 3 doors between us. The remote disappeared after that. I started watching programs on my tablet with headphones. They never told me not to bake, but the flour slowly vanished from the pantry. The sugar, too. The oven knob got mysteriously jammed one day and stayed that way for weeks. Shelley shrugged. Must be old, she said. We've been meaning to upgrade. They ordered takeout almost every night. There were rules, though they never called them that. Shoes off at the door, no perfume. Don't touch the smart speaker. And the kitchen was Shelley's domain, except she barely cooked. I made my own meals and cleaned my dishes before they came home. Once I made a casserole for all of us. Tuna and noodles, just like Greg used to love. I set the table. Waited. At 7, they came in with pizza boxes. Oh, Shelley said, seeing the casserole. Sorry. Greg wanted Thai, and I wasn't up for cooking. Greg gave me a little nod. Maybe tomorrow? The casserole sat untouched in the fridge for 3 days before I threw it out. Even the grandkids started coming by less. Layla was 14 now, always busy with school or friends. Josh, 10, barely looked up from his tablet. I'd offer to play checkers, to bake cookies. They always had somewhere to be. Don't take it personally, Greg once said. They're just modern kids, not like we were. I started walking more. Around the block. To the store, even when I didn't need anything. I learned the names of neighbors' dogs, waved at the mailman. I stayed out of the house as much as I could without causing concern. My room, the guest room, was small, but it was mine. I made it neat, kept my belongings in one drawer. I stopped hanging clothes in the closet because every few months, Shelley would ask, "Do you still need all this space?" Once, when guests were coming from out of town, she asked if I'd mind moving to the basement for a weekend. Just a few days, Mom, Greg said. We need the guest room to look nice. I slept on an air mattress beside the water heater. Later, I found one of my sweaters in a plastic storage bin, damp and mildewed. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I reminded myself that I had no mortgage, no bills, no loneliness. Not really. I reminded myself that James would want me to keep the peace. But peace comes with a price, and I'd paid in quiet obedience. I had made myself small enough to fit into their corners. Until the garage. That night was a line. The moment when inconvenience turned to erasure. I wasn't just not welcome in their home. I was expendable in it. Now, seated in the waiting room of a modest legal office, I stared at the wall clock ticking past 11. I'd called that morning, asked if someone could walk me through the steps, freezing joint accounts, revoking financial proxies, changing beneficiaries. A young woman in a gray blazer greeted me with a polite smile. "Mrs. Carmichael, right this way." Her office smelled like lemon polish and paper. She offered me tea, which I declined. "I just want to understand what's mine," I said. She nodded. "Let's go through everything." We did, line by line. I took notes in a small notebook, the kind with a magnetic clasp. Every page filled with facts, not emotions. Facts were safer. Facts didn't cry in the night, didn't feel betrayed or ashamed. When we were done, she looked at me kindly. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I looked her in the eye. They asked me to sleep in a garage. That was enough. The cashier at the hardware store was the first to speak to me like I was still a full person. "Cold week ahead," she said, scanning the small space heater I was buying. "You got a good one there. Quiet, but powerful." I nodded, gripping the handle of my tote. I'd picked out the heater carefully. Not too expensive, but with enough strength to warm the corner of the garage where I knew I'd be sleeping. I told myself it was just precaution. I hadn't yet admitted the truth to myself, that my place in the house had shifted permanently and not in my favor. A week before that, Layla had stopped by after school. Just her and me in the kitchen. I made cocoa the old way, on the stove, with whole milk and a pinch of cinnamon. She took one sip and smiled. "Nobody makes it like you, Grandma." We sat in silence for a while. Then she said, "Mom says you're always tired, that you like being alone." I looked at her. She was 14, but her eyes were already half closed to things she didn't want to see. "Do you think that's true?" I asked. She shrugged. "You don't say much anymore." That night, I lay awake and thought about all the things I hadn't said. Not when they asked me to give up my bedroom. Not when Shelley boxed my photos and labeled them extra. Not when I heard them joke about me on the patio with their friends. Mom still uses paper checks. Isn't that adorable? They had softened me into silence, not through cruelty, but with mild embarrassment and tired tolerance. Like I was a project someone had started and lost interest in, and I'd accepted it. Out of love, maybe, or fear, or just the old habit of making myself smaller. But something was beginning to move inside me, a shifting of weight, a crack in the floorboards. It began to show in little ways. At the grocery store, I paid with cash instead of the joint card. At the bank, I asked questions about statements I'd ignored for years. And in the quiet of the public library, I began to write letters. Not angry or sentimental, but firm. One to the bank, one to the family lawyer, one to the insurance broker. I mailed none of them yet. But just writing them made something in me sit up straighter. I started watching them, too. How Shelley skimmed through emails on her phone during dinner. How Greg checked his stock portfolio over breakfast. How the kids hardly noticed me unless I stood in front of the fridge. They were busy, that's what I used to say. Just busy. But now I saw something else. They were living lives that didn't require me, unless something broke or needed paying for. That week, I had an appointment with Dr. Marin, my general practitioner. A routine visit. Blood pressure. Joints. Nothing new. "You seem more alert," she said, peering over her glasses. "More engaged." I smiled. I started remembering who I used to be. She wrote something in her notes and said nothing, but she smiled too. After the appointment, I walked instead of calling for a ride. It was cold, but I didn't mind. I liked the sound of my own footsteps. At the pharmacy, I bought a small notebook. Red cover, elastic strap. I labeled the first page. Facts. On the second page, decisions. The third, things they don't know I know. I filled it every night before bed. A kind of inventory. Not of loss, but of what was still mine to control. One entry read, mortgage note, co-signed in 2017. Greg's name primary, mine still on the deed. Refinanced in 2021. Documents not reviewed by me. Another, utilities. Electric bill paid from joint account. Shelley once called it just a formality. And then, retirement funds. Accessed twice in 2022 for emergencies. Amounts not discussed with me. Each fact was a quiet match struck in the dark. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't even planning escape. But I was planning. And when the garage night came, I was ready. They thought I was still asleep when they left for their weekend getaway. I wasn't. I heard Shelley's voice carry down the hall. "She'll be fine. The heater works. And she likes her alone time." They didn't check in. And I didn't wait for them to come back. The garage smelled of gasoline and mildew. Paint cans were stacked beside the folding cot, and a broken step stool leaned drunkenly in the corner, like someone had tried to fix something once and given up halfway through. There were no windows, just a single bulb overhead and the little heater humming faintly by my feet. I sat on the cot, coat still on, hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm tea I'd poured into an old travel mug. The mug was mine, one of the few things I still considered mine, a faded green thing with a hairline crack down the side and James's name scrawled in black marker near the bottom. I'd stopped asking where the rest of my things had gone. Towels, baking pans, a framed photo from our wedding that once sat on the shelf, all moved for space or boxed for safekeeping. Outside, the temperature had already dropped below freezing. I could feel it in my bones, those quiet, stabbing aches that come when you've lived long enough to recognize the weather just by the way your fingers resist buttons. The door to the house had shut 2 hours ago. I heard their car pull out of the driveway, Shelley's laughter bouncing off the garage wall one last time. "Don't forget your overnight bag," she'd chirped. "The resort's got heated floors." I wasn't invited, of course. "Just a weekend getaway," Greg had said. "We figured you'd appreciate the quiet." They didn't mention where I was supposed to sleep. Until the moment Shelley, not unkindly, just casually, had looked up from her phone and said it. "The guest room's taken. You can sleep in the garage, Grandma." I don't think she meant it to hurt. That's the worst part. It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was said like it was practical, efficient, reasonable. So here I was, wearing 2 sweaters and the same wool socks I wore last Tuesday, sitting on a cot beside a lawnmower that hadn't been used in years. The heater ticked and wheezed. The bulb flickered now and then. And the silence. That was the real sound. Not just the absence of voices, but the full-bodied hum of a life I no longer had. I sat that way for what must have been an hour. Then I stood, slowly, walked to the corner of the garage where an old metal shelf held boxes marked Holiday and Greg's college stuff. I found a blanket in one, threadbare, smelled like dust and oranges. I spread it over the cot and lay down. The cot groaned beneath me, the metal bar pressed against my back. I looked at the ceiling, and I waited. Not for morning, not for rescue. I waited for myself. I remembered a night when James and I were young, newly married. The heater had gone out in our first apartment. We lit candles and put on every coat we owned. We laughed until we couldn't feel our faces, then held each other in bed until the morning sun pushed the frost off the windows. There was no one to hold me now. No shared coat rack. No laughter. But there was still me. At 3 a.m., I woke up shivering. The heater had stopped. I got up, knees howling, and kicked it gently. Nothing. I unplugged and plugged it back in. It coughed to life, flickered red, then fell silent. I looked around, teeth chattering, and for a moment I saw the space for what it was. A place to store forgotten things. Dead tools, empty boxes, people they didn't know what to do with. By 4:15, I was dressed, my bag packed. I didn't leave a note. There was no note to leave. They didn't ask where I was going, so I didn't tell them. I walked past the flower beds I used to tend, past the porch light I had paid to replace, past the gate Greg never got around to fixing, and I didn't look back. The bus station was almost empty at dawn. A single man sat slumped near the ticket machines, a suitcase between his knees, snoring softly. The overhead lights buzzed, too white, too loud. I stood in line behind no one, waited for a woman in a maroon vest to glance up. "Where to, ma'am?" she asked, eyes flicking past me before settling back on her screen. "First outbound," I said. Doesn't matter where. She raised her eyebrows but didn't ask. Just tapped the keyboard and said, "Bus to Hensonville leaves at 6:05. You'll need to switch in Halder." "That'll do." She printed the ticket, slid it across. "Cold out there," she said, almost kindly. "Yes," I said, "but not where I'm going." The ride was slow. I sat by the window and watched the landscape shift. Not dramatically, just enough to feel it. Neighborhoods blurred into fields, the dark stitched together with patches of silver frost. The roads were empty, the sky bruised with early light. I thought about what they'd find when they came back. No note, no missing things, just absence. My purse gone, my pills, the travel mug, the blanket folded neatly on the cot, the heater unplugged, the cot itself smoothed flat. They wouldn't panic, not at first. Shelley would think I went for a walk, or maybe to the store. Greg might check the garage, frown at the quiet. It would take a few hours before they started calling. Before they noticed what else was gone, the binder with the financial records, the drawer in my room where I kept my checkbook and bank statements, the folder labeled home ownership documents. I'd never really been invited to discuss. I didn't want to hurt them. That was never the point. I just wanted them to know I wasn't asleep anymore. At the transfer stop in Halder, I bought a cup of watery coffee and sat on a bench with my coat collar pulled high. My phone buzzed once. Greg. I didn't answer. I turned the ringer off and dropped it back into my bag. There's a peace that comes with the early morning, before people know you've disappeared, before the questions start. It's not silence. It's breath. It's space. I remembered the first time I left home, at 21. Married James that fall. We had a single bedroom and a leaky roof, and still we thought we owned the world. He made furniture from discarded wood, and I worked at the elementary school lunchroom, hair in a net, arms elbow deep in dishwater. We built a life that way, with scraps, with smiles, with stubbornness. And when he died, the world didn't fall apart. I kept it moving. I sold the old house. I gave Greg and the kids what they needed. I said yes more times than I can count. I signed forms I didn't read. I trusted they'd keep me close. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being part of the plan. I became the asterisk, the logistical wrinkle. Now, on a bus headed toward a town I barely remembered, I opened my notebook and began to write again. Things I still own. My name. My decisions. A quarter share of the house. A personal savings account with balance last checked at $43,816. A retirement fund not yet touched. My story. That last one mattered more than I realized. By noon, I arrived in Hensonville, a small place. Clean streets, quiet shops, a diner with red booths and real pie. I ordered soup and asked the waitress if she knew a local attorney. She pointed across the street. Second floor, above the pharmacy. I went straight there. The office was small, smelled of carpet and coffee. A man named Richard Grady sat behind a desk, mid-60s, gray beard, kind eyes. "I need to make changes," I said. "To my will. My accounts. My trust in people." He smiled gently. "Let's start with the easy part." And for the first time in years, I did. Richard Grady didn't flinch when I said the word revocation. He just pulled a yellow legal pad from a drawer and clicked his pen. "Start from the beginning," he said. So I did. I told him about the co-signed mortgage, about the joint bank account I no longer checked because Greg managed the online stuff, about the small nest egg I hadn't looked at since James passed, about how I'd been told to sleep in the garage. I said it plainly, like a grocery list. Richard nodded slowly, his pen scratching. He wasn't shocked, which told me more than I expected. "It happens more than people think," he murmured. Quiet sorts of erasure, not overt, just inch by inch. I liked that word. Erasure. It fit. Not abuse, not cruelty, just slow disappearance. By the end of the hour, I'd signed the first batch of forms, revoked financial power of attorney from Greg, requested full control over all joint accounts, instructed Richard to begin proceedings for establishing an individual trust, one with clearly defined beneficiaries. "Anyone in mind?" he asked, tapping the trust form. "One," I said. "My granddaughter, Layla." He looked up. "Not your son?" I met his eyes. "My son has had enough." After I left his office, I stepped back out into the town. The pharmacy downstairs had a display of wool mittens and peppermint lotion. I bought both. I hadn't bought anything for myself in months, not since that sweater last fall, the one Shelley said was a bit too loud. The motel I found was modest, but clean. A small heater chugged in the corner, the bedspread was faded but freshly washed, and the front desk clerk offered me an extra blanket without me asking. "You here for long?" she asked. "Just until I decide what's next." She smiled. "Well, you let us know if you need anything." I took my tea back to the room and settled in with my notebook. Things already done. Attorney retained. Power of attorney revoked. Joint accounts flagged for freeze. Initial trust paperwork begun. Things to do tomorrow. Call the bank directly. Transfer funds into a solo account. Draft letter to Greg. Don't send yet. Decide where to live next. That last line sat heavy on the page. Where does someone go when they've been uninvited from their own life? I didn't want a big house. I didn't want revenge. I wanted quiet mornings. My own schedule. A place where my name wasn't in the margins? I thought about James. About the small lake house we once talked about buying, back before the kids. He dreamed of fishing in the early hours, of watching the sun rise over the dock. I used to laugh at how detailed his plans were. Even the kind of chair he wanted. Something that creaks properly, Edna. There'd been a lake town just 30 minutes from here. I remembered the name now. Winstead. I jotted it down. Just then, my phone, still on silent, lit up. 7 missed calls from Greg, 4 from Shelley, 1 voicemail. I didn't press play. Instead, I opened a clean page in the notebook and wrote in all caps. They will call when they need. They always did. When the heater broke. When Layla needed braces. When the car insurance lapsed. When they wanted to go on vacation and couldn't cover the full airfare. I'd always answered. Always helped. Until now. Now, they'd come home to a house that felt emptier than they expected. To bank notices they didn't understand. To questions they couldn't answer. Let them sit in that silence. Let them feel it. It wasn't punishment. It was balance. The next morning, I put on my cleanest sweater, brushed my hair until it lay flat, and walked the 6 blocks to the branch bank. It was a small place. 2 tellers, a single office with frosted glass, and the faint smell of printer ink and floor polish. The manager's name tag read S. Neary. She looked about 40, with that tight, professional politeness you only earn from years in customer service. I introduced myself. I'd like to review all accounts where my name is listed, jointly or otherwise, and I want to place a freeze on all shared access until further notice. She blinked once. Of course. Do you have identification? I handed her everything. License, bank card, a folder of printouts Richard had prepared for me. I was tired of playing dumb, tired of being handled. She invited me into her office, offered me coffee. I declined. 10 minutes later, she frowned at her screen. Your joint checking account. There's been a lot of outgoing transfers. I know, I said. I'd like that account closed. We'll need your son's signature. No, I interrupted. You won't. I have revocation of joint authorization on file, processed by legal counsel. I tapped the folder. She opened it. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Well, I see. Then yes, we can proceed. Her tone changed. A little more careful, a little more respectful. I'd like to open a new account in my name only, I continued, and transfer all available personal funds there. No linked access. No family names. No auto payments. Of course, Mrs. Carmichael. When I left the bank an hour later, I had a new checkbook, a new debit card, and a printout of every transaction Greg had made in the last 8 months. Rent payments, streaming services I didn't use, a high-end gym membership, a payment to something called Coastal Property Management. I underlined that one 3 times. Back at the motel, I sat on the bed, wrapped in the motel's extra blanket, and went line by line. They hadn't drained me, but they'd chipped away. Little withdrawals. Just until payday, Mom. We'll reimburse you, Mom. It's easier if you handle it, Mom. Greg once said it was about streamlining. One card, one account. A family system. But it wasn't a system, it was a siphon. And I was the reservoir. Until I wasn't. I called Richard that afternoon. They'll come looking, I said. He chuckled. Let them. Everything's legal and documented. You're protected. I don't want to fight. You're not fighting. You're exiting. That night, as I lay in bed with the hum of the heater in the background, I let myself imagine what came next. Not the confrontation, not the phone calls I still refused to answer, but the after, the cottage by the lake, a porch swing, a bookshelf with nothing but mystery novels and old photographs, my own chair, my own dishes, my own key. I wanted less. Less control over me, less airless politeness, less walking on eggshells in a house I partly owned but never belonged to. I wanted mornings with coffee that stayed hot and wasn't poured into travel mugs I wasn't allowed to touch. I wanted the freedom to choose silence, not have it imposed. The next day, I would call a real estate agent in Winstead, and I wouldn't tell anyone. Let them wonder. Let them come back to a house that looked the same, but was missing something vital. Let them feel the hole I'd quietly left behind. I heard the first voicemail at 6:42 p.m. I didn't mean to play it. My finger brushed the screen while I was setting the alarm on the motel's old digital clock, and suddenly Greg's voice filled the room, tinny and unsure. Mom, hey, we just got back and... Are you out? Your room's empty. I mean, everything looks okay, just... Yeah. Call me when you get this. Okay? That was the first one. By the time I finished brushing my teeth, there were 3 more. One from Shelley. Sharp. Brittle. Edna, this isn't funny. If you're upset, we can talk, but disappearing isn't the answer. And 2 more from Greg, each more anxious than the last. The 4th ended with, Mom, I swear if something happened... I turned the phone off. It was tempting. So tempting. To reply. To let him know I was safe. That nothing happened. That I had simply removed myself from a place where I wasn't wanted. But I didn't. I let the silence speak. Let them sit in their perfect, climate-controlled house with their matching dinnerware and their guest room, freshly vacuumed and waiting. Let them step over the quilt I'd left folded in the garage. Let them notice how clean the coffee table was, how the checkbook was gone, how no bills had been paid. They didn't call Layla. I knew that because at 8:17 she texted me herself. Grandma, are you okay? Dad's acting weird, said you're out. What's going on? I replied to her and only her. I'm okay, darling. I just needed some air. I'll call you tomorrow. 3 dots appeared, then stopped. Then another text. I miss you. And I wrote, I miss you too. Then I turned the phone off again. The next morning, I walked to the town's little breakfast cafe and ordered pancakes, extra butter. No one stared. No one asked where I was from. The waitress called me Han and topped off my coffee before I could ask. I opened my notebook. Calls from Greg. 7 calls from Shelley. 4 texts from Layla. 2 missed. Nothing essential. There was a clarity now that I hadn't known I needed. That day, I went back to Richard's office and signed the final documents. The trust for Layla was officially initiated. My remaining funds were protected. The deed status on the house back home was under review and soon to be legally partitioned. They won't be able to sell it without your consent anymore, Richard explained. Good, I thought. Let them learn what consent feels like. As I left, my phone, now briefly powered on, lit up with a message. Greg, we need to talk. I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. I smiled. That phrase. There's always been a misunderstanding. My tone, my expression, my absence at events I was never invited to. The way I noticed things, remembered things. The way I stopped offering, stopped agreeing. The way I left. They never understood the simplest truth. I had the right to say no. No to being moved around like furniture. No to eating at a different table. No to being told I was too sensitive when my name was dropped from plans. And now, I had said no with every form I'd signed, every transaction I'd undone. By noon, I had 2 appointments to view small rental homes near Winstead Lake. 1 bedroom, no stairs. Quiet neighborhoods, not much. But mine. And tonight, I'd sleep again under a roof no one could push me out of. The first house was small, but it smelled like fresh paint and dry wood. The landlord, a quiet man in his 60s named Frank, handed me the keys without asking too many questions. Take your time, he said. It's open. The living room had 1 window, slightly warped but still functional. The light came in sideways, soft and thin, like the early pages of autumn. The walls were plain white, the carpet a light beige, the kind that showed dirt easily, but also made the room feel open. There was only 1 bedroom, and the kitchen was little more than a countertop and a stove. But the bathroom had a deep tub, and the porch had enough room for a chair. I stood in the center of the room and listened. Nothing. No television in another room. No voices through the wall. No footsteps overhead. Just the hum of quiet. It was beautiful. I signed the lease that afternoon. Frank didn't ask about family. Didn't ask why an old woman was moving into a rental alone with cash up front. Just nodded when I said, 1 year, no automatic renewals. Good fences, he said. Make good neighbors. I moved in the next day. 2 bags, a suitcase, and the small red notebook. No furniture yet. I sat on the floor and drank instant coffee from a plastic cup. The heat worked. The door locked. My name was the only one on the lease. It wasn't freedom in the dramatic sense. There were still bills to pay, pills to take, steps to climb slowly. But it was peace. Real peace. The kind you feel when you no longer have to tiptoe through your own life. That night, I turned the phone on again. More messages from Greg. More from Shelley. This time in a tone that tried to sound less sharp. Then, at 9:04 p.m., a call from Layla. I answered. Grandma? Her voice was a whisper, like she didn't want to be overheard. Hi, baby, I said. Where are you? Somewhere warm, somewhere quiet. She paused. Dad's freaking out. He said something about lawyers. And you taking back the house? I let the silence stretch a little. I didn't take anything back, I said. I just stopped giving it away. I don't understand. I know. Another pause. Can I come see you? That, that right there, was the only thing I hadn't planned for. Yes, I said, but not yet. Soon. I just need a little time to remember how to be alone without feeling lonely. Are you mad at Dad? I thought about that for a long second. I don't think so, I said finally. I think I'm just done pretending I'm not. Layla didn't speak for a while. Then she whispered, I miss your stories. I'll tell you more, but you have to come to me for them now. Okay. We said goodnight, and I watched the phone screen fade to black. The following morning, I set up a checking account at the local credit union and transferred the trust funds for Layla into a separate folder in the safe deposit box. Everything had a place now. Everything was protected. On my way out, I passed a secondhand store and bought a kettle, a small table, and a chair with a worn cushion. I carried them home in 2 trips. No one offered to help, and that suited me fine. By noon, I had my first cup of tea in my new house. No one asked what I was doing. No one told me where to sit. No one turned down the heat. It was my name on the door now, and I had no intention of erasing it again. I was slicing apples for pie when the knock came. Not a timid one. Firm. 3 slow thuds, spaced like punctuation. I set the knife down, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and glanced at the clock. Too early for the landlord. Too late for delivery. I opened the door halfway. Shelley stood there, arms crossed, coat unbuttoned despite the cold, hair perfect. Behind her, Greg sat in the car, engine still running. Can we talk? She asked, voice carefully neutral. I didn't step aside. About what? She hesitated. Greg didn't want to come up. Said he wouldn't say the right things. That's a good start, I said. But I stepped back anyway. Not out of kindness, just curiosity. She walked in, looking around like she expected dust, like she was preparing herself to be generous about how small the space was. It's very minimal, she offered. It's clean, I replied, and quiet. She nodded once. Greg is upset, confused. Upset he's not getting mortgage support, or upset I stopped funding his gym membership. She blinked. That's not fair. No, I said. It's accurate. Silence. I moved past her, poured myself a cup of tea, and waited for the real reason she was here. She didn't sit. I don't think any of this is necessary, she began. You've always had a place with us. Greg thought, no, I interrupted. Greg didn't think. That was the problem? He assumed. Assumed I'd stay, assumed I'd give, assumed I'd shrink. I know the garage thing seemed harsh, she said quickly. But we had guests, important guests. There wasn't space. There was a room, I said. It just wasn't for me. She frowned. It wasn't personal. That, I said quietly, is the line that made me leave. Shelley looked like she'd rehearsed for something else, for resistance maybe, or tears. But not this. Not quiet certainty. We didn't mean to hurt you, she said, softer now. But you did. I just don't want this to be forever. I sipped my tea. It already was. She stared at me. You stopped seeing me as someone with a boundary, I continued. Someone with a memory. You wanted help, not history. I'm here, aren't I? Yes, I said. But it's not your visit that counts. It's what you do when I'm not in the room. Another silence. Outside, the wind picked up. Her coat fluttered behind her. You could still come back, she said. We could adjust. I already did, I said. I adjusted to solitude and peace and knowing what belongs to me. Finally, her gaze dropped. She glanced once around the room, at the single chair, the folding table, the kettle. You really don't want to come home. I am home. She nodded slowly and stepped back toward the door. I don't know what Greg will do, she said. He's proud. So am I. Shelley paused. Layla said you want to see her. I do. She's worried. She'll be okay, I said. We both will. She opened the door. Cold rushed in. I'll tell him you're fine. I never wasn't. Then she was gone. No drama. No slamming. No breakdown. Just a woman who lost access to something she never saw as mine. I finished the apples. The pie came out just right. Layla arrived 2 days later, carrying a grocery bag with both hands and a nervous smile that tugged more at my heart than any of Greg's voicemails ever could. I brought the stuff for your tea, she said, holding up the bag. The kind you like. The weird dried ginger kind? It's not weird, I said, stepping aside. It's proper. She laughed, a real one, full and sudden, and walked into the little kitchen like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like she'd done it 100 times. The truth was, she hadn't. At the old house, we'd shared more rides than rooms. She'd always been busy or distracted or following the rules Shelley set without question. Not cruel, just distant. But not today. She took off her coat, kicked off her sneakers, and stood barefoot on the cold kitchen tile. It's small, she said, looking around. But it feels kind of like you. It is me, I said. Or at least it's mine. I put the kettle on while she unpacked. Ginger root, honey, the square tin I used to keep on my windowsill before it mysteriously disappeared in their house. She'd found the same brand. I had to order it, she admitted. No one sells it near us. I appreciate the effort. She leaned on the counter and watched me slice the ginger. Dad's not taking this well, she said after a moment. I nodded. He wouldn't. He says you blindsided him. Did he mention the garage? She swallowed. He says that wasn't what he meant. It's always not what he meant. But it was what he did. Layla didn't argue. She looked down at the counter, tracing invisible patterns with her fingertip. Her hands were shaking. He doesn't know what to say, she whispered. And neither do I. You don't need to say anything, Layla. You showed up. That's more than enough. We drank tea at the folding table. She told me about school, a boy named Eli, how she might apply to a college in Oregon. I listened like I was learning a new song. At some point, she asked, Did you ever want to run away before? I took my time answering. I never wanted to run. I just kept hoping someone would notice I was standing still. She looked at me then, really looked. The way James used to, like I was a person and not a parent. I'm glad you left, she said. So am I. She stood and washed the cups without being asked. Found the dish towel. Put everything back the way it had been. Not like a guest. Like family. Like respect. Before she left, she turned to me on the porch. You know they're going to keep trying, right? I know. What will you do? I'll keep doing what I'm doing. Living without asking permission. She hugged me. Arms tight around my shoulders, head pressed to mine like she hadn't done since she was 8, and scraped her knee on the driveway. You're brave, she whispered. No, I said. I'm just tired of not being. When she left, I stood on the porch for a long time, watching the curve of the road until her car disappeared. Then I went back inside and added a line to my notebook. Today, someone came to me. Not for help, not for money, just for me. The cottage settled into me as easily as I settled into it. Mornings came with slow light through the kitchen window and the soft pop of the heater kicking in. I started eating breakfast at the table again, not standing at a counter, not waiting until someone else finished. Toast, eggs, half a grapefruit. Real meals. Quiet rituals. I bought a small radio at the thrift shop and let it play while I folded laundry or wiped down the counter. Old jazz sometimes, or weather updates in calm, practiced voices. I liked the sound of people speaking without needing anything from me. Every few days, Layla texted. Nothing urgent. Just pictures of her drawings, screenshots of songs she thought I'd like, the occasional meme I didn't understand but laughed at anyway. I never pushed her for more. She came when she could. That was enough. Greg didn't come. He wrote, though, a long email with phrases like deeply regret and never meant and want to make things right. It read like something written at 2 a.m., rewritten at 3, and sent at 4 when pride and panic collided. I didn't reply, not out of spite, just because it wasn't owed. Shelley wrote once too, shorter, colder. She used words like disruption and escalation, as if I'd pulled a fire alarm in the middle of a dinner party. Her message ended with, "We just wish you'd spoken to us directly." I read that one twice. Because I had, many times, in small ways. In silences and swallowed questions, and in every time I said, "It's fine," when it wasn't. But people don't hear you when they're not listening. I saw them once. Briefly. I'd gone into town for groceries, turned the corner by the pharmacy, and spotted them across the street. They didn't see me. Shelley was saying something, tight-mouthed, hands moving fast. Greg nodded, distracted, jaw clenched the way it always was when things weren't under control. They looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that went beyond sleep. I stepped into a side alley and let them pass. Later that afternoon, Richard called. "The title audit's complete," he said. "Your name's secure on your quarter share of the property. Any attempts to refinance, sell, or take equity without your approval will be legally blocked." "Thank you," I said. "There's more." I waited. "Your original co-signing on the 2017 mortgage. There were some irregularities. Missing signatures, delayed filings, enough that if you wanted to contest your financial responsibility, you could." I felt nothing. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Would it hurt them? Financially? Yes. Legally? Possibly. I was quiet a moment. Then, "No. Let it stand. I just want it to stop." Richard hesitated. "You're sure?" "Yes. I didn't walk away to start another fight. I walked away to end the quiet one." After the call, I took my tea onto the porch and watched the wind roll through the trees. A dog barked in the distance. Leaves blew in circles on the gravel path. I thought of James, of the way he used to say, "You can't fix everything, Edna. Some things you just walk past." He was right. That evening, I unpacked the last box. Inside, 3 photo albums, my wedding ring in a little cloth pouch, and the small quilt they'd left folded in the garage. I shook it out, shook the dust of memory from it, and laid it across my bed. It fit perfectly. Greg called again. I didn't answer the first 3 times, but on the 4th, I picked up. Not because I had anything left to explain, but because I wanted to hear his voice with all the layers stripped away. No audience, no Shelley listening from the next room, no kids in the background. "Mom?" His voice cracked on the first word. "I'm here," I said. Long pause. "I don't know what to say." "Then start with the truth." He let out a shaky breath. "We didn't mean for it to get like that. It just happened. Things piled up. Schedules. Bills. We didn't notice." "You noticed," I cut in. "You just didn't look." He didn't argue. "You left me in a garage?" He tried to jump in. It was temporary. It was only a night. No, I said. It wasn't one night. It was every day that came before it. That night just made it clear. More silence. I imagined him sitting in the kitchen, hunched over the table like a boy again, waiting for someone to fix it for him. I panicked when I saw you were gone, he said. Because of the accounts? No, he said quickly. Because you were gone. I let that sit. I thought you'd always be there, he said. Even if you were quiet, even if you were mad. I thought you'd just stay. I know, I said. I'm sorry. He meant it, not perfectly, not in the way that rewrites the past. But he meant it the only way he could. Broken, late, and real. I don't hate you, Greg. I know. I just can't come back. His voice caught. I didn't call to ask you to. That surprised me. I called because I wanted you to know I get it now. Not everything, but some. Some is a good start. I've been talking to Layla, he added. She told me. She said you're happier. I'm freer. She wants to come stay with you for a few days this summer. She's welcome any time. I heard him breathe in slowly, like he wanted to say more. Then he stopped. Mom, he said finally, what do you want me to do? I thought about that. Leave me in peace, I said. And next time someone hands you silence, don't assume it means nothing's wrong. He said okay. We hung up without promises, without neat endings. Afterward, I sat on the porch with my tea and watched the wind move across the water in small, steady pulses. It wasn't closure, but it was enough. The lake was quiet that morning. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that fills you up slowly, leaf by leaf, ripple by ripple. The kind of quiet that feels earned. I sat on the porch wrapped in my quilt, sipping coffee from the same chipped mug I'd carried out of the garage that night. The mug had survived it all. Cracks, drops, being boxed up and forgotten. A bit like me. A bird landed on the railing, tilting its head as if it recognized something in me. I smiled, nodded once, and it flew off again. That day I didn't do much. I rearranged the bookshelf, wrote in my notebook, watered the tiny herbs growing in pots along the windowsill. It wasn't a productive day by any external measure, but it was full of choice, of breath, of space that belonged to me. The mailbox held a letter from Layla. Real paper, real handwriting. Grandma, I told Dad, I'm spending part of the summer with you, whether he likes it or not. He didn't argue. He just nodded. I think that's his version of okay. I'm bringing books and those ridiculous puzzles you used to hate. You're not getting rid of me now. I pressed the page to my chest and closed my eyes. At lunch, I took a walk down the gravel path behind the cottage, the one that led through a tangle of trees and ended at a bench by the water. James would have loved it there. Not because of the view, though the view was kind, but because it was the kind of place where nothing rushed you, nothing expected anything. I sat for a long time, and when I stood up again, something shifted inside me. Not dramatically. Just a click. Like a door that had been stuck for years finally eased open. When I got back to the cottage, I pulled out my red notebook and added the final page. What I have now. A roof I chose. A silence I own. A granddaughter who sees me. A past I no longer apologize for. A name I didn't let them erase. I placed the notebook on the windowsill and opened the window just a crack. Let the wind touch the pages. Let the world know I stayed standing. I made tea. I turned on the radio, and as the music played, something old, something slow, I let myself exhale. We don't always get justice, but we can get clarity. We can get ground under our feet again. We can stop being polite in the face of erasure. We can leave, even if it's late, even if it's quiet, and we can begin again without asking permission. If this story touched something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's been sleeping in silence for too long. We deserve more than survival. We deserve return.